We have a massive New York Rangers trade update to go over today. As the deadline inches closer, we may have some clarity on what Chris Drury is planning to do at this year's trade deadline, and some of the new targets that have been revealed will have Rangers fans fired up. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Rangers Digest. But before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 68% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the New York Rangers, whether it be trade rumors, trade reports as we head into the deadline next week, practice updates, game reactions, all that fun stuff, this is the place to be. So it is free. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, we got an interesting report from Nick Kypreos, who has some of his deadline predictions that came out yesterday. And some of the names that are now linked to the New York Rangers are very interesting because some of them make total sense. And another one that we're going to cover today is just very interesting. I'll put it like that and we'll get right into it. And this again is from Real Kipper, at Real Kipper on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days. From Nick Kypreos, there is a big and physical player who intrigues me, and that is Buffalo's Alex Tuch. Alex Tuch is a fantastic player, and he's only 28 years old. We'll get into his stats in a second. The 6'4" winger will be appealing to any Stanley Cup contender, once projected as a possible captain of the Sabres. He no longer appears destined to be part of their long-term plans, and that's because the Sabres look like they're headed for, obviously, another rebuild there in Buffalo, and the New York Rangers are on a different timeline. And what is that timeline? I don't think they're trying to rebuild. I think they're trying to get better now, but obviously not trying to acquire players who are in their mid-30s, and this guy is certainly not. When you look at Alex Tuch, this is from Rono, who obviously has some great advanced analytics, and we've been showing them here on the channel quite a bit recently. I still do not believe Buffalo would trade Alex Tuch. It doesn't make sense in my eyes, but here we are. Alex Tuch is a legit top 6 two-way forward with a great contract. He has a fantastic contract. We'll get to that in a second. He adds a lot offensively. He's pretty responsible defensively. Great two-way player. He can definitely chip in here and there for goals. He had a great season just a couple of years ago when Buffalo had a great season. I feel like this is a guy who, again, is a victim of playing on a really bad team. He should be a lot better than he is, but of course, if you look at some of the players he has to play with in Buffalo, not a great situation whatsoever. This is from John. Now, Alex Tuch is a player I'd like to have on the New York Rangers. This would be another move in the line of culture changes. 1 year left after this year, so keep that in mind. He does have term on his contract if they were to acquire him at this year's trade deadline, which I think could be unlikely, but I'm not too sure. You know, Chris Drury's in the complete sell mode. I'll say that. I think there's a couple guys in terms of UFAs he's going to move. He is absolutely going to move, but I wouldn't be so sure that he isn't going to acquire some players at this year's deadline as well. I think there's going to be a lot going out, but there's going to be some players coming in as well. And 1 year left on his deal after this year, on a steal of an average annual salary of $4.75 million. You just wonder who is on his 5-team no trade list. I would imagine the New York Rangers are not on his 5-team list. I would imagine it's a bunch of Canadian teams, which most players usually have. So that would be interesting to keep an eye on. But again, 4.75 for not just the rest of the season, but the season after that. He's only 28 years old. This guy's almost 220 pounds. He's 6'4". This is exactly what the Rangers could need. Now imagine, I'm going to paint this scenario for you guys here. Imagine if Mika Zibanejad were to be moved this offseason and you added a guy like this on your top line right wing. I feel like that's a much better option. You move the $8 million out of the way. This guy is only going to be 29 years old. You can re-sign him if you like. And I'm sure like he's going to get a pretty significant raise, I would imagine, for what he brings to the table. But to have him under contract next year, you can kind of make a run at it again next year with some of the players that you have in place this year. Obviously, barring Alexi Lafreniere actually play to his contract, which is a big problem as of late. But I think this is a very, very good option. And for him to be, you know, loosely linked, I'll say, to the New York Rangers at this point is a pretty big deal. And we'll take a look at his stats now as well. When you take a look at Alex Tuch, again, he's only going to be 29 years old. He's 6'4", 220 pounds. He is a plus 16 on the Buffalo Sabres this year. I don't like to look into plus minus. You guys who've been watching the channel for a long time know that, but this is something to say. He plays quite a few minutes as well. He's almost averaging 20 minutes of ice time a night. He is a great two-way forward. And again, great two-way forward, but doesn't shy away from the points either. He has 44 points in 56 games on a very awful Buffalo team. He's good for like 30, maybe even 40 goals if you put him with some of the players on the Rangers, right? So I think that this is a very good player. This is a player that they should absolutely have some interest in. And who they're going to have to trade away for him, I mean, you're probably looking at, you know, some of your decent prospects here. They're probably going to want like an Othman or something, but I feel like if you are trying to compete in this window still, because obviously they just acquired JT Miller, if you're trying to compete this year, next year, maybe the year after that still, I feel like this is a pretty good move. This is a guy that adds a ton of value. I love Brendan Othman. I said yesterday in a video, you should let him develop, but if you have an opportunity to go out and get a player like this that's going to make an immediate impact, I feel like that is something, and then we know can make an immediate impact. Obviously, Brendan Othman showing flashes, but we don't actually know what he's going to be, right? And obviously, the Rangers don't have a great track record of developing players, so I think it could be a very interesting option. Now, another option that has been rumored to the New York Rangers is the fact that they need a third-line center. We know that if they want to make any noise in this year's playoffs, if they're going to make the playoffs, they'll probably need a third-line center. Again, that's still up in the air. We'll have to see where they are. They're missing Adam Fox now at this point, too, so that's another whole situation in and of itself. And, you know, this is from Phil Kosher again, and also he took this from Vince Mercogliano's latest article, or he was on a podcast, excuse me, a name who I think a lot of teams are interested in because he's big, strong, bruising, and can play center and the wing is Michael McCarron of the Nashville Predators. That's a guy I think the New York Rangers would definitely have some interest in. And again, that's from Vince Mercogliano. Michael McCarron is in year one of a 2-year contract. He is 6'6", 230 pounds. He can play your third line center position pretty effectively. I think he's a decent two-way player. You know, followed him a little bit in his junior career as well. Won a Memorial Cup with the Oshawa Generals. Pretty good player. Again, he's not like a difference maker. He's not a groundbreaking player or anything like that. You can come in and play a serviceable role as a third line center, maybe even a fourth line center if need be, barring any injuries, stuff like that. So I think it could be another interesting option. If you take a look at the lineup, you know, right now as it stands, you know, if you want to move Carrick down, maybe McCarron goes in there in the third line there. Obviously, top line right wing or second line right wing right now is Zibanejad. If you were to swap that out with Alex Tuch going into next season, I think that significantly improves your team. And obviously, you're getting younger in that way. And we know Zibanejad is not the same player that he used to be. So that is something to keep in mind as well. So, you know, very interesting option there with Michael McCarron as well. Obviously, a lot of pieces are going to be going out. You're going to free up $4.5 million in Ryan Lindgren. So if you bring in Alex Tuch at 4.7, I mean, that pretty much cancels out in that way, especially heading into next season. So I think that's a good option. And I think, you know, calling up more of the kids the rest of this year is probably what they're going to do. Probably the way to go as well. But I think there's going to be a lot of movement. Jones is in the lineup right now. Obviously, we don't have an update on Keandre Miller, what's happening with that. So a lot of moving pieces for the New York Rangers right now. I think things could end up getting pretty interesting. But Michael McCarron, let me know in the comments what you think about Michael McCarron. I think it could be an interesting option. Very cost effective too. Like, he only makes $900,000. You're probably not going to have to give up much for him to acquire a player like this, because obviously he's not highly sought after by many teams, I would imagine. He could be. I think this is a decent maybe fourth line center, third line center, depending where you want to play him and you know, how your team kind of looks. Getting away from the Rangers, I mean, but obviously with the Rangers, you know, same thing. Depends where he would fit in the mix. I think it could be an interesting option. And I think Tuch, if available, I would imagine that he's maybe not available, but I guess here we are, right? I kind of agree with Rono here, but like, if he is available, this is a guy that you probably should. Like, I'm sure he's definitely open to playing for the New York Rangers. And at that cap hit and his age and what he can bring to the table, the two-way game, and the fact that I think he could score probably 40 goals with the New York Rangers, I feel like that is a no-brainer move, especially if you move some salary out this coming off season. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the New York Rangers do. Let me know what you think about Alex Tuch and Michael McCarron. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything New York Rangers.